Summit Church. Welcome back to Discipleship Essentials. This is actually week 7 of us doing it together. It's week 7 out of 8 weeks. And so next week, Jeremiah will be closing down this section of Discipleship Essentials. But I'm super glad that you've joined me today. My name's Jamin Stinziano. I'm one of the pastors here at Summit. And I have been assigned the topic of living on mission in quarantine. So I'm going to do the best that I can to unpack that. If you have a Bible, we're not going to get into it yet, but you can turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. We're going to be reading there in a little bit. But to understand what we're talking about today when we're talking about mission or living on mission, I think it'd be helpful really quick to remember what Adam talked about a couple weeks ago. So if you watched it a couple weeks ago, he talked about really the foundation of missional living, or why we would even care about the mission of God. He actually talked about our role in the mission of God. Sorry about that. And he talked about the fact that we were created for mission, and we've been reconciled as ambassadors for the mission. We're actually going to double click on that today. And then he talked about the fact that we're empowered by the Spirit for mission. And so really the foundation of mission is looking and understanding really why we exist. Why did God create us and put us here in His image for His representation? And then last week, if you watched, Orlando talked about really stewarding our lives in the midst of these times and stewarding our lives for the sake of mission. So today we're just going to try to jump off of both of those and talk about what it looks like to live on mission very specifically in the here and now. So one of the discipleship outcomes we have at Summit is personal mission. Personal mission is defined as this: it's understanding the mission of God and discovering how He has uniquely gifted me to love and serve His church and the places where I live, work, and play, and I'll add in there for this season, and where I quarantine. So where I live, work, play, and where I quarantine. And so really we want to understand how this mission distills down into every one of our lives so that it's kind of always at the forefront of our thinking. God has a redemptive mission for His church. That redemptive mission is that His glory would fill the earth, that every man, woman, and child would have repeated opportunities to hear the gospel, see the gospel, respond to the gospel, and then really living into this reproductive mission, that we would make disciples, we'd reproduce multiplying disciples who then represent the gospel. They speak and they act on delegated authority so that every man, woman, and child in those places where we live, work, play, and quarantine can have the opportunity to respond. So if you are a Christian, if you are a disciple of Jesus, then you are an individual who has a responsibility in the mission of God. It's not the church's responsibility as a whole, the organization of the church, the pastors and the people who work here, but it's every single one of us living on mission. I love what Trevin Wax says about this. He says, there is no true gospel-centeredness that does not lead to mission, because the gospel is the story of a God with a missionary heart, a father who desires that all would come to repentance, a shepherd who seeks and saves the one lost sheep. Mission mirrors God. I love that idea. Mission mirrors God. And we need to recognize, Trevin Wax goes on, we need to recognize that the Bible intends to reorient our lives around God's mission and to equip us to join Him in the work that He is doing. Discipleship really is that. It's reorienting our lives around Jesus and around His mission. And so to understand that a little bit better today, I want to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So Adam read this passage a couple of weeks ago, and I want to go a little bit deeper into it if we can, and truly try to understand what this means for us today. So let's read these verses together. We're going to start in verse 13. Paul says, for if we are beside ourselves, that word means crazy. If we're crazy, it is for God. And if we are in our right mind, it is for you. I don't know if any of your friends or neighbors or family members have ever looked at you as a Christian and said, you are crazy. And if they're doing that, you're in good company, right? They are looking at you just like Paul and his companions were looked at. They looked crazy. And he says, if that is the case, it's for God. And if we're in our right mind, it's for you. For the love of Christ controls us. It seizes us. I love that idea. The love of Christ controls us because we have concluded this, And so what he's going to talk about here is they are convinced of something that is true, and because they are convinced of this thing, then they are controlled by it. He says, here's what we have concluded, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he, that's Jesus, died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. From now on, therefore. So I love this shift. Paul is saying, here is what we believe. Here is what this means for us. So because of that, from now on, this is how we are going to live. This is how our lives are reoriented because of this. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. So we don't see individuals as just being human beings, earthly beings, but we recognize that there's something much deeper going on in every man, woman, and child. He says, even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he or she is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. So something radical has happened. A transformation has taken place. Because one died for all, we now who have trusted in him, Jesus Christ, we all have now been made new. So everything is different about us now. Verse 18 says, all of this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself. That's he brought us together. He brought us back into relationship with himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So the ministry of reconciliation was first and foremost God's ministry. And then what he does is he gives it to his children, men, women, children who trust in Jesus Christ. He gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. So again, if you heard Orlando last week, he talked about taking those things that God has entrusted to us and faithfully using them for his glory. So here we see what God has entrusted to us, the message of reconciliation. Therefore, because of that, we are ambassadors for Christ. We stand in his place, and it's God making his appeal through us. And then Paul goes on and he makes an appeal again. He says, God making his appeal through us, we implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So a lot of verses there, but really just jam-packed with so much truth. Not going to be able to pull it all out, but I want to just highlight three things before we move forward. The first thing is this, that as ambassadors of Christ, we recognize that Christ's love controls us. Just think about that. Christ's love controls you if you are in Christ. That is the way you are meant to operate. What that means is that you get to know who he is. He's glorious. And because you know who he is, you get to do what he wants. What does he want? Adam again talked about it. He wants his glory to fill the earth. And so because he controls you and because he controls me, we get to be in relationship with the glorious one, and we get to be a part of spreading his glory throughout the world. What a significant responsibility and calling and privilege that is for each and every one of us. Second thing is this, that as ambassadors of Christ, we recognize that we no longer live for ourselves, but now we live for him who died. That means we get to walk in step with the Spirit. We don't walk now in our own spirit. We don't walk with our own intentions being the things that guide us, but rather we look to the Spirit and we want to respond to the Spirit. What is the Spirit saying? I was reading this morning in Acts chapter 8, where it talks about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And it says Philip's there, and then all of a sudden the Spirit speaks, hey, go to Gaza, which was a desert place. And so what does Philip say? He doesn't say, I don't really feel like going to the desert. He says, okay, and he gets up and he goes. And he goes, and suddenly there's this Ethiopian eunuch who's traveling, and the Spirit says to Philip again, go talk to that person. Philip doesn't waver in that moment. It says Philip ran to catch up with this Ethiopian eunuch. And there he shares the gospel with him. And the Ethiopian trusts in Jesus, and he's baptized, and everything changes for him in that moment. He becomes a new creation. You see, because we are ambassadors for Christ, his love controls us, and we now no longer live for ourselves, but we live for him who died. We're led by the Spirit. And then finally this, we view the world. As ambassadors of Christ, we view the world. That includes the people around us. It includes ourselves as well. We view it different than we viewed it before. We don't view it according to the flesh. We don't view it through earthly eyes, but we want to view the world, the people around us, ourselves included in that. We want to view it with kingdom eyes. God, would you show us what it is that you want us to see? Show us what it means to relate to these individuals or to respond in this situation in a way that really reflects the kingdom values that you are building in your children. Really, what I want you to understand is this, that as disciples of Jesus, we are his ambassadors. And because we are his ambassadors, we carry with us, we go, wherever we live, work, play, or quarantine, we carry with us the message of reconciliation and also the fruit of reconciliation. So we carry with us the message, that's the words, that's declaring the gospel, that's engaging with the people around us and imploring them to be reconciled to God, right? So we share the gospel message of reconciliation, but then we also live out the fruit of reconciliation. That's the lives that we now live as a result of being reconciled to God. And those lives and the fruit that comes from those lives, all of that plays into the mission that God has for each and every one of us. So I want to now just kind of look at then the way that we live, right? So as ambassadors, Christ's love controls us. As ambassadors, we no longer live for ourselves, but we live for him who died. And as ambassadors, we now view the world different than the way that we did before. So God calls us as ambassadors. He puts us here in the midst of this society. For those of us who live here in Southwest Florida, he puts us here in Naples or Fort Myers or Estero or Lehigh Acres or Cape Coral or wherever it is that you have the pleasure of living. And he puts you there to be his ambassador. Now, there have been different ways that the church has engaged with culture throughout the years, and I just want to talk about two of those ways and then give a third better way, all right? So oftentimes, the church withdraws from culture. And what I mean by that is the church looks and says, okay, the culture around me is evil, and the people in the church, they say the culture is evil, so instead of engaging with it, we're going to isolate ourselves from the community around us and from the culture at large. And what happens when the church and when the people of God withdraw from society is there is this huge hole left in the culture where God has intended for his people to be speaking into. No longer are God's people speaking into that because they're isolated from the culture and don't have a voice into it, all right? So that's one way that people respond to culture. A second way, which is equally as destructive, maybe even more destructive, is this idea of assimilating into the culture, or an unquestioned or an uncritical assimilation into culture. And what that is it's God's people who say, okay, we're going to live and we're going to be a part of culture. We're going to even maybe try to live on mission in the midst of culture. And for the sake of relevance, suddenly, instead of being different in the world around us, individuals start to look like the world around us. Do you know what I'm talking about there? Maybe you've even experienced that in your own life. Maybe you have this religious duty that you do. Okay, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to do all these things. But really, the reflection of your life is a reflection of the worldly values of the culture around you. And that is destructive to the testimony of God, right? So we have people who withdraw, they isolate from the culture, they have no voice into it. How can we live on mission in the midst of a quarantine when we don't have a voice in the culture around us? You have other people who assimilate into it uncritically. They don't even think about the decisions they're making anymore, and before they know it, they look like the world around them. Suddenly, their testimony is lost, their witness is ineffective. No, we want a better way, right? We want a third way. And that third way is the way of active engagement. We want to, as the people of God, ambassadors, put here for a reason, right? We're not just here by chance. We're here because God has put us here as his representatives. We want to actively engage with the culture around us. I want to give you some ways that I think that we can do this. 5 S's, okay? Slowness, simplicity, selflessness, sacrifice, and suffering, okay? So this idea of slowness, when we actively engage with culture, we're living on mission in the world around us in the midst of quarantine. It's an opportunity to slow down and look and see what the Father is doing and to really join him in those places. So many of us, we're so busy. We're so busy with our jobs. We're busy with our families. We're busy with our schedules. And we go so fast through life that we actually miss what the Father is doing around us. And we miss the relationships and the presence he wants us to have in the lives of people around us. Some of us just need to slow down. And quarantine seems to be an invitation to do it. But if you're anything like me, you went into quarantine thinking, what in the world am I going to do? And you find yourself at the end of the day and you're like, where did this day go? I filled it with so much meaningless stuff. And so this is an invitation for us and for myself to slow down and to simplify our lives. Right? So many times we overcomplicate things. We think we have to do everything. We have to be at every place. We have to do all of these things. When it seems to me that active engagement requires that we simplify our lives. We simplify what we're doing. We even simplify how we engage with the people around us. We put so much pressure on ourselves. I don't know how to say the right things. I don't know the right answers. God doesn't care about that. He just wants you to live simply with the people around you with active engagement. How about this? The third S, selflessness. So many times I say, you know what? I don't want to go do that. I don't want to talk to my neighbor. I don't want to go out and serve. I don't want to take another child into our home through foster care. I don't want to give in this way. When really active engagement, it requires a selflessness in our lives. It also involves sacrifice. So many of you sacrificed this last week when we said, hey, we want to do a virtual food drive. Would you give toward this? And so many of you gave, and many of you gave sacrificially. I love what Proverbs says. It says, the one who freely gives suddenly finds himself even richer. And it doesn't mean richer materialistically, but richer in your own life because you've actually sacrificed. And that's the way of the kingdom. So what does it look like for you to slow down, simplify your life? Give yourself to a selflessness. Even be willing to sacrifice. And sometimes that fifth S, to suffer. Oftentimes, living on mission in the midst of the world around us means that we suffer. We suffer ridicule, we suffer pain, we suffer loss of relationships, we suffer not getting that whatever it is. What's it called when you, Joe, answer me here. What's it called? A promotion in the workplace. We suffer so many different things, and oftentimes that's what it means to live on mission. You're actively engaging, so you're not going to assimilate into the world around you. You're not going to do the things that everybody around you does. You're not going to say the things. You're not going to cheat your way through this, right? Well, that's all part of living on mission with God. So where do you need to slow down? Where do you need to simplify? Where do you need to just be selfless? Where do you need to sacrifice? Where do you need to maybe even suffer for the cause of Christ, right? So we want to actively engage with the world around us. Why? Again, because we're ambassadors. As ambassadors, we carry with us the message of reconciliation and the fruit of reconciliation. So we don't withdraw from the world around us. No, Christ's love controls us, so we engage with the world around us. We don't live for ourselves any longer. We live for him who died. So we engage with the world around us, not assimilating uncritically, but actually thinking about our lives and the message that they portray to the world around us. We want to actively engage with the people around us. So, quick, I'm out of time. I want to ask just a couple diagnostic questions, and this is where I want to end. We're actually going to spend some time here. And so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to ask you 3 questions, and I want you to take time answering these questions. You're going to see the questions on your screen, and I want you to take, maybe 30 seconds to a minute and just think through these questions, and I want you to answer them. And I'm going to lead you through them, And the purpose for doing this is really, again, it's a diagnostic. Let's look at our own lives. Let's consider what it looks like to actually live on mission and if we're actually even doing it, okay? So the first question is this. You'll see it on your screen. Who or what controls me? Who or what controls me? Now, I want you to think about this. Is it love for self? Is it love for family? Is it love for neighbor? Love for comfort? Love for security? How about this in America? Love for personal rights? Love for conspiracy theories, right? You can tell I've been on Facebook and I've seen all sorts of people writing things and saying things about conspiracies. I see people saying things about our rights. Yes, awesome. We're Americans. We have personal rights. But oftentimes, those personal rights for the cause of Christ need to be sacrificed. So what motivates you? What controls you? Or is it love for Jesus? Take some time. Just think through that. Okay, now let's look at this next question. So if I am to live for him who died, that's Jesus, what, if anything, needs to be changed, tweaked, or strengthened in my life? Let's look at our time, our talent, our treasure that Orlando talked about last week. Let's ask ourselves this question. Where do I need to slow down? Where do I need to simplify? Where do I need to sacrifice? So what needs to be changed, tweaked, or strengthened? And now let's consider this last question. In what tangible ways does the life that I'm living right now reflect the purpose that God has for me as an ambassador? So some questions underneath that. Who in my life is hearing the message of reconciliation from my lips? Like, who am I sharing the good news of Jesus with? Second, who in my life is experiencing the fruit of reconciliation from my actions? So how are the people around me experiencing the fruit of gospel transformation in my life? Take some time and think through those questions. So hopefully you've had some time to actually think through the answers to those questions. And I want to encourage you, think about those afterward. Some of you even might be watching online. If you want to write in some of those answers or even prayer requests, God, would you help me in this area? God, help me learn to articulate the gospel to the people around me. God, help me show the fruit of reconciliation. Just share those things either online here or with the people around you. Here's what we know. Transformation usually moves along quicker as we share it in community, as we share it with the people around us. So in whatever way you can do that, let's share those things. You might also be wondering, gosh, I don't know how to do this stuff, and it's not enough time on a 25-minute section here online. There are some books I'd love to just suggest to you. If you want to learn more about having conversations with people about Jesus, there's this great little book. It's called Turning Everyday Conversations into Gospel Conversations. It's by a pastor over in the West Palm area named Jimmy Scroggins. You can get it online. Another one that I love is called God's Love Compels Us, and it really just talks through different ways that God's love compels us. I think we even have this in the Resource Center at Summit. And then finally, this one, Faithful Presence. It talks about 7 disciplines of the church and the people who make up the church to actually live faithfully in the world around them. So pick up those books if you want to read a little bit further. So remember this, as disciples of Jesus, we are his ambassadors. We carry with us a message of reconciliation and the fruit of reconciliation in our lives. So we don't want to withdraw from the culture around us. We don't want to assimilate to the culture that we're in. Instead, we want to actively engage with the culture that God has placed us in so that we can be a part of his redemptive mission, his glory filling the earth so every man, woman, and child has repeated opportunities to hear the gospel, see the gospel, respond to the gospel where I live, work, play, and where I'm quarantined. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.